This guy idolized Jack the Ripper so much he wanted to continue his work. He lured sex workers to his flat with the promise of money and drugs. Then he butchered them and scattered their remains in trash cans around Camden, London. They called him the Camden Ripper, but unlike Jack, this Ripper was caught red-handed. Let's recap. It's Christmas time in London, 5 days after to be exact. Little girls play with their new Bratz dolls. Little boys plug in their new Xboxes. It's 2002 and both toys have been flying off the shelves all season. Meanwhile, a homeless man scours the streets of Camden looking for something to eat. He spots a row of garbage cans filled with the remains of Christmas dinners. He's hoping to find a turkey leg Grandpa couldn't finish. Instead, he finds a different kind of leg. A human leg wrapped in black trash bags. There are two, both cut into tiny pieces. He ties the bag closed and takes it to the hospital. The hospital calls the police and New Scotland Yard shows up moments later. Inside the garbage cans behind a pub, police find 8 more bags filled with various human body parts. The detectives suddenly feel queasy. They have too many pieces for one body. When all the pieces are reassembled, they're looking at the bodies of 2 young women minus the heads and hands. Based on their size, police think they're mother and daughter. Mom would have been in her late 30s. Daughter could have been as young as 14. The search for the Camden Ripper is on. But just like the infamous hunt for Jack the Ripper, police have no real leads. Luckily, modern technology allowed them to comb databases for possible suspects. One name pops up right away: Anthony Hardy. He is an unemployed man in his 50s with a long track record of violence and mental health issues. Anthony should have been off the streets long before these bodies turned up. Sadly, gross negligence and several layers of failure got these 2 women killed, and they may not be the only ones. Anthony Hardy, aka the Camden Ripper, lived uneventfully until the early 1980s. He was born in 1951 in Staffordshire, England. His family was lower middle class, a lifestyle Anthony wanted to escape. He dedicated his free time to hard work and education. Anthony was so bright that London Imperial College invited him to study engineering. He met Judith Dwight in the mid-1970s. They dated, married, and moved to Tasmania, Australia, where they raised 2 boys and 2 girls. But not everything was ruse and rainbows in the land down under. Secretly, Anthony had spiraled into alcohol and drug abuse. Both made his mental health problems worse. Much worse. Fast forward to April 5th, 1982, about 6:30 in the morning. His wife is asleep in bed when Anthony attacks her with a frozen water bottle. She's shocked, dizzy, and in considerable pain. Anthony drags her into the bedroom. He's already filled the tub with water. He pushes her over the edge and holds her head under, trying to drown her. Judith reaches for the drain plug, but Anthony has it jammed in there tight. She only survived because their oldest child walked in and stopped his dad. Anthony told police he'd been planning to kill his wife for 2 weeks. He described himself as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. When his wife misbehaved, his evil side came out to play. Sounds terrifying, but against her better judgment, his wife forgave him and he remained a free man. The family returned to London where Anthony leaned into his evil side. Months later, after holding her captive in a hotel room, Judith finally had enough. Their divorce was finalized in 1986. With Judith getting custody of the kids, Anthony stalked her daily, making it impossible for her to start over. A restraining order in 1987 wasn't going to stop him. He ignored it, which led to his arrest and imprisonment for 12 months. Now, let's stop and just think about that for a second. Here you have a man who, on paper, admits to planning his wife's murder. He threatens her, kidnaps her, and stalks her for years. And for all this, he only spends a year in jail? No mental health orders, no supervision, no nothing. Anthony is a ticking time bomb. To be fair, once he got out, he did look for some professional help. Turns out he was battling manic depression and they put him on medication to ease the roller coaster of symptoms. Throughout the early to mid-90s, he bounced around hostels, blowing his cash on booze and nights out. Trouble seemed to follow him, landing him in hot water for minor thefts and scuffles. But for him, a short spell in jail was just a way to get a roof over his head. Come 1998, things took a darker turn when a sex worker pointed the finger at Anthony, accusing him of rape. She wasn't alone in her accusations. 3 others told similar stories, yet with evidence thin on the ground, the cops couldn't pin anything on him. By the time the calendar flipped to 2000, Anthony had snagged a 1-bed flat in public housing on Royal College Street, not far from the notorious King's Cross. With its buzzing drug scene and nightlife, Camden became his playground. Rumor has it, his first victim might have been swept away by the Thames that same year. Now it's Christmas time again, the first of the new millennium. This time, robotic dogs and Nokia cell phones are all the rage. 24-year-old Zoe Parker didn't get to celebrate. The last time anyone saw her was December 17th working the streets in West London. Then, on December 28th, a man walking along the River Thames noticed something strange floating in the water. When he gets closer, he realizes what he's looking at. It's Zoe's upper body. She's been cut in half at the waist with something incredibly sharp, maybe a samurai sword. She washed up near Church Road in Battersea, not far from Anthony's place on Royal College Street. Her parents only identified the body thanks to a unique tattoo and a twisted tooth. 2 months later, in February 2001, 3 boys are fishing in Camden when they see a bag floating down the canal. They hook it and reel it in, only to discover human body parts inside. It's like the Thames torso killer has returned from the dead and is stalking women like it's the 1880s all over again. The second body is Paula Field, a 31-year-old prostitute from Liverpool. She developed a nasty crack cocaine habit and was selling her body to pay for drugs. She was last seen stepping into a red car on December 13th. Paula's death was ultimately linked to an ex-boyfriend in 2011. He had a nasty habit of killing his exes and tossing their bodies in the London canals. To this day, Zoe Parker's murder remains unsolved, but if you ask the police, they'll tell you Anthony Hardy had something to do with it. Anthony wasn't the friendliest neighbor on Royal College Street. He'd argue with anyone that came close, like the 61-year-old woman who lived next door. One day, she hears loud banging on her front door. She opens it to find Anthony sitting on the ground, bashing her door with a hammer. When she asks if there's a problem, Anthony says, "Nope," and walks away. Anthony gets into it with another neighbor in 2002. She complains to the police, and Anthony responds by writing "F you, slut" on her door. Then he pours battery acid through her mail slot. Police show up and search his flat. Disgusting is an understatement. He's drawn cryptic images and strange messages on the wall. It looks more like a graffiti-tagged subway station than someone's living space. Down the hall is a locked room with a towel pressed under the door. Anthony says someone's renting it and they've been gone for a while. That, of course, is a lie. Officers find the key and open the door. Inside is the body of 38-year-old Sally White, a sex worker from the King's Cross area. She's naked on the bed, face down, with a gash in the back of her skull. There's blood on the wall and bite marks on her thigh. Anthony was arrested on suspicion of murder, but you won't believe how he got away with it. At the time, Freddie Patel was a forensic pathologist in the London's coroner's office. In his professional opinion, Sally White died of a heart attack. He chalked her death up to natural causes, and since you can't charge someone for murder if the victim dies of natural causes, Anthony was set free. Dr. Patel had botched several other cases over the years. Some led to criminals walking free. One was a 5-year-old girl who died by her mother's abusive hand. Dr. Patel said she must have fallen at home. Another involved an innocent man who was struck and killed by police officers in 2009. Dr. Patel blamed that one on a heart attack too. In 2012, after a career marred by error, Dr. Patel was stricken from the medical register. Back in 2002, Anthony was held at St. Luke's Hospital while police investigated Sally's death. He tried conning the doctors. He was sure he was the smartest man in the room. The doctors knew exactly who he really was. They saw a cruel man who'd most likely offend again. He was a danger to society, especially women, with a long history of violence and domestic abuse. He was impulsive and lacked empathy. Consequences meant nothing to him. He only cared about his next sexual fix. If he re-entered society, he'd likely re-offend and cause other serious physical or psychological harm, according to the doctors. Yet still, they let him go. He was released under the condition that he be supervised through Christmas, but the social workers who were supposed to be watching him were so scared of Anthony, they refused to go anywhere near his apartment. Can you blame them? You'd think that'd be a red flag, but it wasn't. Our homeless man found the body bag on December 30th, leaving police with 2 new bodies on their hands, 2 deaths that could have been avoided. But who were these women? The bodies belonged to 34-year-old Bridget McClellan and 29-year-old Elizabeth Liz Valade. Police used DNA to identify Bridget's body. Elizabeth's required more unconventional means. It turned out that Liz Valade had breast implants. Police were able to trace the serial numbers on her silicone implants back to a hospital in Germany. They finally put a name to the headless body. She was the only child of an Iranian professor and his English wife. According to her mother, she fell in with the wrong crowd as a teenager. She left home at 16 and had little contact with her parents after that. She was a single mother working in a massage parlor to make ends meet. That's where she met a wealthy married man who showered her with gifts and luxurious treats. He put her up in an expensive flat, but the affair didn't last long. Soon, Elizabeth was back on the streets trying to pay for her new crack cocaine addiction. She eventually crossed paths with Anthony Hardy and was never seen alive again. According to reports, a blood trail led from the trash bins back to Anthony's first-floor flat. His name also came up while searching for past offenders with a history of violence towards women. Scotland Yard executed a search warrant, but Anthony was long gone. Luckily, he left behind a mountain of evidence. They found a hacksaw with human skin still attached to the blade. His apartment was filled with porn, some bought, some homemade. There was blood in the bathroom and a devil mask near a note that read, R.I.P. Sally White. In his bedroom, police found more of Liz Valade's body parts wrapped in black bags. The hunt was on, but Anthony could have been anywhere in England. He'd been gone for several days by the time police searched his apartment. They caught a lucky break when on January 1st, CCTV cameras at a London hospital caught Anthony picking up an insulin prescription. He had diabetes. He couldn't go far without his medication. He'd shaved his beard to change his appearance, but one feature stuck out more than anything. Anthony was wearing a New York Yankees baseball cap. It was the same cap from the pornographic photos police found in his apartment. He'd posed his victims' bodies and used the hat to cover their faces. On January 2nd, an off-duty officer and his son visited a local children's hospital. When they went into a smoking area, the boy recognized Anthony from TV. They called the police, and Anthony ran for it. Police found him hiding in some bushes nearby. He refused to go down without a fight, knocking one officer unconscious and dislocating another's eye from its socket. They finally pinned and arrested Anthony for the murders of Bridget McClellan and Elizabeth Valade. They also tacked on Sally White for good measure. While in custody, Anthony answered no comment to every question. Then, in a shocking twist, he pled guilty to all 3 murders as his trial date loomed. He described how he lured the women to his flat under the false promises of money and drugs. He said they engaged in extreme sex before he strangled them to death. It's believed his motive for killing these women was to photograph them. In fact, he was in the process of photographing Sally White when the police interrupted his shoot. He developed over 40 images and sent them to a friend. Thankfully, that friend handed the photos over to the police. After the shoot, Anthony used a hacksaw to cut their bodies up in the bathtub. Neighbors confirmed this, claiming they heard drilling sounds coming from Anthony's apartment. On November 25th, 2003, Anthony was sentenced to 3 life terms in prison. Still, there was a chance he could walk free on parole one day. That hole closed in May 2010 when a high court decided Anthony should never see the light of day. They changed his sentence to life without parole. Police don't really believe Anthony Hardy stopped at 3 victims. They're pretty sure he also killed Zoe Parker, but they can't prove it. 2 other women almost fell victim to the Camden Ripper, but thanks to a feeling in their gut, they decided not to go into his apartment. To this day, police have never recovered the heads or hands of Liz and Bridget. Anthony Hardy likely took the secret to his grave. He died in prison in November 2020. Some sources simply say it was sepsis. Others say he died from COVID. Anthony idolized people like Jack the Ripper and the Thames Torso Killer. But unlike his idols, Anthony was caught and outed for the psychopath he was. Why do you think it took a gruesome double murder to get him off the streets? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if you like getting all the crime in half the time, be sure to give this a thumbs up and subscribe so you never miss a recap.